Just one woman, one first-class ticket, and an entire airline empire was brought to its knees. Have you ever walked into a luxurious space and immediately felt judged because of how you look? This is the story of Alicia Morgan, a black woman simply dressed pulling along an old suitcase. And just because she didn't look like first class, she was humiliated, questioned, and excluded. But what no one knew was this: she controlled $4.8 billion, and she was the one who held the fate of Grand Sky Airlines in her hands. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't shout. She didn't even look angry. She just stood there, calm and silent. And yet, just a few minutes later, she was escorted to a closed-door interrogation room. The reason? Because she was a black woman and she had entered the luxurious first-class lounge at Cleargate Airport, USA. A lounge reserved for the elite, where people wore designer labels, pulled gleaming luggage, and spoke with practiced confidence. And then into that space walked a woman, simply dressed. She pulled an old suitcase, moved with quiet grace, and looked around with calm eyes, neither arrogant nor timid. But every gaze turned to her, instantly filled with suspicion. A security manager gave a quick glance. A lead flight attendant looked at her, then looked away. And somewhere nearby, a quiet click sounded from a radio button. Maybe Alicia didn't know she was being watched. Or maybe she did and chose silence. She didn't resist. She just stood waiting, composed. Then, under the weight of the entire room's attention, two security officers approached, stern faces, tense eyes. But what they didn't know was that ordinary-looking woman held invisible power, the kind that could shift the direction of an entire airport in an instant. And when Alicia reached into her pocket to retrieve her phone in that exact moment, the fate of an entire airline quietly began to change. Her name was Alicia Morgan. She wore a plain dress, her hair neatly tied back, no jewelry, no designer bag, just one worn canvas suitcase and a clearly visible first-class e-ticket on her phone screen. The moment Alicia stepped into the priority boarding zone, everyone stopped what they were doing to look at her. No one said a word, but the air thickened with unspoken tension, curious stares, quiet judgment. Airport staff whispered into radios at a distance. They watched her like she didn't belong there. Alicia seemed to know it, but her face didn't change. She stood there confident. Her eyes scanned her phone as if reminding herself, "I have every right to be here." Across the lounge, one woman watched her very closely, Rachel Barnes, head of airport security. With 15 years of experience, Rachel was known for being strict, rigid, and for judging people by what she sees. She took in everything: Alicia's scuffed shoes, the faded suitcase, the neat hair, the calm gaze. And to Rachel, it didn't match the image of a first-class passenger. Without hesitation, Rachel gave a command over the radio. "Priority Zone 1. Suspicious passenger. Proceed with verification." Just minutes later, two security officers appeared and moved directly toward Alicia. Their footsteps quick, their eyes locked on her. But Alicia didn't flinch. She knew this was only the beginning. A major test was underway. What no one expected was this: Alicia Morgan was not an ordinary traveler. In fact, just yesterday, Alicia had personally approved a $4.8 billion bailout for Grand Sky Airlines, the very airline she was about to fly with. She was a senior executive at Advalink Group, overseeing internal audits and ethical inspections for major partners. Today's trip wasn't for rest. It was a Level 3 covert inspection, a secret audit organized by Alicia herself, and no one at the airline knew. Alicia chose to dress, simply act modestly, and show no signs of power. because she wanted to see how people would truly treat their customers when they thought no one was watching. She remembered her first day at a prestigious university, surrounded by students from wealthy elite backgrounds. The condescending glances, the biting whispers, the muffled laughs behind her back, they still echoed in her ears. That day she had made a vow she would never let anyone look down on her again. She would prove that skin color and background never determine a person's worth. Those memories now blurred with the image of Michael Hartley's cold expression at the party, only making her resolve even stronger. But the sharpest sting came from the gaze of Richard Hartley, the father who had done nothing but stand in silence while his son humiliated another human being. She asked herself, is wealth and status truly worth more than dignity and self-respect? Her phone lit up again. This time it was a call from Sarah Mitchell, her best friend, and the company's vice president. Olivia hesitated for a moment, then answered. Sarah's voice trembled with worry. The board is in full panic. A few members want to call an emergency vote to reverse the decision to withdraw from the deal. They're saying the company can't afford to lose such a massive investment. Olivia took a deep breath, her voice steady but firm. I understand, Sarah, but if we give in now, then everything we've built, our ethics, our values, our dignity, it will all mean nothing. Sarah was silent for a moment, then replied softly, I get it, I really do. But sometimes, to achieve something greater, we have to make sacrifices. I just worry you'll lose everything because of one emotional moment. Olivia shook her head gently, her tone calm but unwavering. No, Sarah, not this time. No one has the right to ask another person to trade away their dignity, not for $900 million, not for any price. The call ended. Olivia sat alone, the first light of dawn beginning to filter through the window. The sleepless night had passed, but the storm inside her had not yet settled. She knew full well this decision would carry consequences. There would be criticism, resistance, and intense backlash. But deep down, she also understood something else. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones most worth making. The next morning, exactly at 7 a.m., Olivia walked into the company's main boardroom, where the members of the board of directors and the senior executive team were already seated. The tension in the room was so thick every breath felt weighted. Standing before them, Olivia calmly swept her gaze across each familiar face. She saw many who had once been long-standing allies, yet now their eyes were filled with doubt. They seemed to have forgotten that it was the very values they had built together, integrity, respect, that had brought the company this far. Her voice rang out clear and composed. I believe everyone here is aware of what happened last night at the Hartley estate, and I know a $900 million deal is a tremendous opportunity, but I cannot and will not trade dignity and principle for a contract. The boardroom stirred with murmurs. Peter Anderson, the CFO, shot up from his chair, his voice sharp. Olivia, this isn't a decision you can make alone. It directly impacts the company's survival. Olivia remained calm, her eyes steady on Peter. I understand your concern, Peter, but this company thrived because we never compromised on ethics. If we now shake hands with the Hartleys after what they did then, we're the ones betraying our core values. At that moment, Margaret Lewis, a veteran board member, spoke with a softer tone, but one that still carried weight. Olivia, you're letting personal feelings cloud a business decision. Even a formal apology from them, no matter how hollow, would be enough to smooth things over publicly. You know this. $900 million is no small matter. Olivia exhaled gently. She respected Margaret's experience, but experience didn't always mean being right. Margaret, she replied firmly but gently, This isn't about emotions. It's about respect and human dignity. An empty apology can't erase the public humiliation that I and we endured. Peter frowned, his voice now tinged with worry. If we pull out the stock price, we'll plummet. How do you plan to explain that to the shareholders? Olivia looked him straight in the eye, unwavering. I'll tell them that we don't build this company on cowardice. We don't take the easy road, we take the right one. And integrity is what ensures our survival in the long run. The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't anger, it was reflection. Meanwhile, at the Hartley estate, Michael was watching the board meeting unfold via a financial news broadcast on his phone. He lounged in a leather chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. To him, this was nothing but a power game, and he was confident Olivia would soon fold under internal pressure. He didn't realize he had misjudged her completely. Back in the boardroom, Olivia continued, I'm not asking for unanimous agreement, but as the leader of this company, I am officially declaring we are withdrawing from the Hartley deal, and I will take full responsibility for any consequences. That firm declaration struck the room silent. Everyone understood these weren't just the words of a CEO. They were the commitment of a person willing to defend her dignity and that of the company with everything she had. Olivia turned and left the room, leaving behind a heavy atmosphere, confused expressions, and a leadership team profoundly shaken by her unshakable resolve. She knew the decision would bring storms, but deep in her heart, she was certain this was the right choice, and it was one she would never regret. Just hours after the tense board meeting, Olivia Bennett appeared before the public, this time in a grand auditorium packed with hundreds of reporters from across the country, all awaiting her official statement. Camera flashes flickered non-stop as Olivia stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple yet powerful white suit. Her hair was neatly tied in a bun, and her eyes radiated unwavering resolve. The room fell into complete silence, as if everyone could feel the weight of this moment. She leaned gently toward the microphone and spoke clearly. My dignity is not for sale. That sentence landed like thunder in clear skies. The room seemed to erupt, as dozens of questions were immediately hurled in her direction. Ms. Bennett, are you worried about negative reactions from shareholders? Asked a veteran journalist. Olivia met his eyes and responded firmly. We believe our shareholders understand the core values this company stands for. We cannot build a future on deals that compromise our dignity and self-respect. A young female reporter followed up, her voice laced with skepticism. Some claim your decision was emotional, that you prioritize personal feelings over the company's interests. What's your response to that? Olivia didn't flinch. If defending my self-respect is called emotional, I accept that. But I firmly believe that in both business and life, there are principles we should never trade, no matter the justification. Backstage, Sarah Mitchell, Olivia's close friend and the company's vice president, listened with a mix of emotion and pride. She knew Olivia was doing what few ever dared, putting principles above profit. Meanwhile, in the Hartley estate, Michael Hartley watched the live broadcast. His face hardened with every word Olivia spoke. When she publicly confirmed the withdrawal from the deal, he gritted his teeth. She actually went through with it. Michael was used to people backing down in the face of the Hartley family's power, but not Olivia Bennett. She didn't back down. She stood her ground with grace, and that threw him off balance. On stage, the press conference heated up. Reporters asked about discrimination in the business world, the ethics of corporate partnerships, and what Olivia endured the night before. She answered each question calmly and intelligently, earning even greater respect from the crowd. Finally, a well-known anchor asked the last question with genuine sincerity. Ms. Bennett, if you could send a message to young entrepreneurs, especially those who've been underestimated like you, what would you say? Olivia looked straight into the camera, her voice low but powerful. I would say this: no one has the right to define your worth based on your skin color, gender, or background. True success isn't measured by money, but by how much dignity and self-respect you can hold on to in the face of pressure and temptation. That quote quickly spread across social media. The hashtag "Oyster respect is priceless" began trending worldwide. Standing on that stage, Olivia remained firm, unshaken, unapologetic. She knew storms were still ahead. But in that moment, she understood something deeply. Real strength isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about remaining yourself in the middle of it. As Olivia Bennett wrapped up her press conference and her words continued to echo across the media landscape, an unexpected storm began to erupt. And this time, it struck right at the heart of the Hartley empire. That same evening, while Michael Hartley was scrolling through his phone in his private study, a notification popped up on his screen that made him freeze. A video barely 2 minutes long was going viral at lightning speed, amassing millions of views within hours. Michael went pale. He tapped on the clip. There he was standing in the grand ballroom, champagne glass in hand. Crystal chandeliers casting light on his smug face and his voice crystal clear. Did someone send the housekeeper too early? That moment, the humiliation, the arrogance, the blatant discrimination had been caught on camera by someone in the serving crew, someone Michael had never bothered to acknowledge. Within hours, the clip had become a social media firestorm. Outrage exploded across platforms, journalists rushed to cover the scandal, and the hashtag #JoccerRespectIs priceless surged to the top of global trending lists. The public was furious. Massive boycotts of the Hartley Corporation and its subsidiaries spread like wildfire. Social media users demanded a public apology, with many even calling for Michael Hartley's resignation. At Hartley's headquarters, the PR department was under siege. Inboxes flooded with press inquiries, investor concerns, and business partner withdrawals. Several major corporations immediately pulled funding or canceled contracts. Hartley's stock plummeted, dropping over 18% within just a few hours of trading. A career, a legacy, and an empire built over decades were now teetering on the edge, all because of one careless remark. In his office, Michael sat, frozen eyes locked on the phone screen. "What the hell is happening?" he muttered. He had always thought himself untouchable, protected by wealth, family name, and legacy. But now, a single moment of arrogance meant as a cheap laugh had become irrefutable proof of his entitlement and prejudice. Meanwhile, in Olivia's office, she was reading through a flood of messages from around the world, notes of support, congratulations, and admiration. Sarah Mitchell walked in, holding a thick folder, her face lit with disbelief and excitement. "Olivia, you won't believe this," Sarah said breathlessly. "That video's blowing up. The whole world is talking about you. And we're getting partnership offers from huge companies, names you once only dreamed of working with." Olivia glanced at the familiar logos: Sterling Global, North Star Industries, Wilson Group. Not one of them affiliated with the Hartleys. They were all companies known for prioritizing ethics and human dignity over pure profit. She smiled softly, not out of personal pride, but for something much greater. She said, "Sarah, this isn't just my victory. It belongs to everyone who's ever stood up to protect human dignity. I'm just one part of a much bigger movement. Sarah nodded, eyes glistening. No one else could have done this, Olivia. You showed the world there are values more precious than money. Olivia turned to look out the window. The city buzzed as usual, cars streaming through the streets. The world hadn't stopped. Business hadn't stopped. But today something had shifted. She was no longer just a successful businesswoman. She had become a symbol of integrity and self-respect, something no power, no wealth could ever buy. At the Hartley estate, Richard Hartley, the patriarch of the family, stormed into his son's office. His face was tense, his eyes burning with both anger and worry. "Michael, do you even understand what you've just done?" He growled, his voice hoarse. Michael looked up, trying to appear calm, but the confusion in his eyes betrayed him. "I'll handle it. Everything will settle down eventually." "Settle down," Richard shouted. One foolish sentence just dragged this entire family through the mud. The media's attacking us. Our stock is plummeting. Business partners are backing out one by one. And now, the Hartley name is under threat like never before. Michael was speechless. For the first time in his life, he saw his father, the man who had always shielded him, paved over his mistakes, not standing on his side. There was no more protection, just genuine disappointment. And for the first time, a creeping sense of fear entered Michael's heart, a feeling he had never allowed himself to acknowledge before. At Hartley Group headquarters, an emergency board meeting was convened. The executive team was visibly shaken. All eyes were on Chairman Thomas Gallagher, who had stood by the Hartley family for over 30 years. He stood slowly, his voice heavy. "We have no other choice. To protect the company's reputation and operations, I propose the immediate suspension of all executive authority from Michael Hartley, pending the outcome of a formal investigation and the restoration of public trust." The room fell into a stunned silence. Michael, pale-faced, shot to his feet. "You can't do this. This is my family's company." Thomas looked him squarely in the eye, his voice resolute. "No, Michael. This is a company with thousands of employees and investors who are now suffering the consequences of your reckless actions. Whoever caused this must take responsibility." Michael stood frozen. His world was crumbling around him. The very people who once bowed to him now turned their backs. Outside the Hartley headquarters, hundreds of protesters held up signs. "We won't tolerate discrimination. Human dignity is priceless." Major news outlets broadcast the protests live. Corporations that once proudly partnered with Hartley began publicly severing ties. Media agencies, retail chains, banks, everyone was distancing themselves from the collapsing empire. The press dubbed it the greatest ethical crisis in Hartley Group's history. In his office, Michael stood silently staring down at the crowd of protesters. His usual arrogance was gone. All that remained was a hollow look of disbelief. "Just one sentence," he murmured. Just one sentence destroyed everything. Behind him, Richard entered quietly. Gone was the stern, angry man. In his place stood a tired, sorrowful father. He said softly, "Michael, I once believed money and power could protect you from your mistakes, but this time I was wrong. You've just learned a lesson I should have taught you long ago." Michael turned to him, eyes red. "Dad, is there still a chance to fix this?" Richard sighed, voice low. "Maybe, but it won't be easy, and the price you'll pay will be steep. Olivia Bennett, the woman you looked down on, she's the one who taught you the lesson I failed to. Real strength doesn't come from wealth. It comes from respect and self-respect." Meanwhile, at Olivia Bennett's office, a new day had begun. The morning finance segment had just wrapped up, and Sarah Mitchell stepped in with a thick folder in hand. On its cover were logos of some of the world's most prominent corporations. Olivia Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion, "You've done something no one dared to dream of. They came not for our numbers, but for your character, for what you stood your ground to protect." Olivia smiled softly, flipping through the documents. There was no pride, no boasting. Sarah: "I didn't do this to win anything. I did it to stay true to what I believe. If just one person, only one, finds their sense of self-worth again because of this story, then everything I went through was worth it." Sarah nodded, her face radiant. "It's not just one person, Olivia. You've inspired millions." Just a few weeks after the shocking incident, Olivia Bennett's name had risen far beyond the world of business. Across social media, news outlets, universities, and global forums, people no longer referred to her simply as a successful CEO, but as a living symbol of dignity, integrity, and the strength of self-respect. On every media platform, millions, especially women of color, began sharing their own stories. Stories of being looked down upon, unfairly treated, passed over due to prejudice. Posts with hashtags like Mampus Dignity, above all, and respect as priceless, spread everywhere, from university lecture halls to law firm offices to protest marches for equality. Through her calm silence at a glittering gala, Olivia had touched millions of wounded hearts. Prestigious universities invited her to speak. At each venue, thousands of students packed into auditoriums, hanging onto every word. There were no flashy slides, just a calm woman speaking from the heart about the value of respect and believing in oneself. Many students stood up with tears in their eyes, saying that Olivia's story had given them the courage to reject prejudice, that they no longer felt invisible. Nonprofit organizations, women's rights groups, and racial equality movements began using Olivia's story as a living example of one clear message: true power doesn't come from status, it comes from self-respect. On national television, Cynthia Brooks, a well-known actress and social activist, publicly declared, "Olivia Bennett showed us that no success is worth it if it costs you your dignity. I'm proud to stand with her, and I hope this world sees many more like her." While Olivia's name continued to be honored, the Hartley empire plunged into a full-blown crisis. Investors pulled out. Partners canceled deals. Hartley Group was forced to announce a complete restructuring plan to save what remained. As for Michael Hartley, once the face of the family's next generation, he had now become synonymous with failure, arrogance, and discrimination. He barely appeared in public anymore. No more confident walks past the gates of the mansion. No more applause. No more admiring handshakes. Only cold stares and questions no one cared to answer. One still afternoon, Richard Hartley entered his son's office, this time not to scold, but to speak a truth he had long avoided. "Michael," he said quietly, "I used to believe that giving you everything, money, power, status, would make you strong. But I was wrong. Real strength doesn't come from what you have. It comes from who you are when all of that is taken away." Michael sat silently. "You might lose your reputation, your power, but if you also lose the ability to look in the mirror and respect yourself, then you've lost everything." Back in Olivia Bennett's office, the work continued, but everything had changed. Calls poured in. Invitations to speak, collaborate, appear on television non-stop. But Olivia stayed grounded, maintaining her inner peace. She declined most of the flashy media appearances. She didn't seek the spotlight. She simply wanted to lead, to grow her company, and to live by her values. One evening, with the city lights glowing outside, Olivia sat alone by the window, quietly watching the world below. Sarah walked in holding a short message from a major shareholder. "Olivia, you didn't just win. You changed the way the world thinks about the true value of a person." Olivia smiled softly. "Sarah," she said calmly, "you don't have to be the best. You just have to be someone who never loses yourself, no matter what happens." Sarah looked at her eyes welling up. "You don't even know Olivia. You've changed so many lives, including mine." 1 year after the scandal that rocked the Hartley Corporation, Olivia Bennett took the stage at the Global Leadership Summit, one of the most prestigious events on the planet, bringing together leaders, thinkers, and social advocates from across the globe. This year's theme, "The Price of Dignity." The hall fell utterly silent as Olivia stepped forward. She wore a minimalist white suit, her face softly illuminated by stage lights. Her eyes, as always, calm, unwavering, resolute. She didn't need a script. She walked to the center of the stage, looked around at every face in the crowd, people expecting a keynote speech, but instead receiving a truth. Dignity is not something to be bought or negotiated, her voice steady and low. Yet in life, we often face a choice: either preserve our self-respect or trade it away for what the world calls success. The room held its breath. Olivia drew in a deep breath and began to recount what had happened, not in anger, not in dramatic detail, but in the voice of someone who had moved beyond pain and now deeply understood the power of silence at the right moment. "Not long ago, I believed success meant 9-figure deals and sitting at tables with the powerful, but I was wrong. True success is walking away from that table with your self-respect intact, even if all you leave with is your integrity." She paused. Many in the audience slowly bowed their heads in quiet agreement. Dignity is not the privilege of the wealthy or the powerful. It belongs to all of us as long as we refuse to let anyone take it away. When I was publicly humiliated, I could have lashed out. But I chose silence, not because I was weak, but because I believe the strongest response is sometimes the calmest one. I walked away quietly, but my heart never stayed silent, and that changed everything. As she finished, the room erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. Tears welled up, not out of pity, but from a newfound sense of strength. Meanwhile, across the city, Michael Hartley sat alone in front of a large screen. His face fell blank as he watched Olivia on stage, calm, powerful, and without a trace of vengeance. Every word she spoke landed like a blade slicing through his outdated pride. He had once believed he controlled everything. Now he understood Olivia didn't win through strategy or power. She won because she was right, and because she never lost herself. He turned off the screen. Silent. No one called him the golden heir anymore. He had lost it all: wealth, status, his father's trust, and the respect of those who once bowed before him. But the thing that hurt the most was knowing that the woman he once mocked had now become a mirror for the entire world to see its conscience. Meanwhile, Olivia continued her journey, not through loud speeches, but quiet conviction in every action, every decision. She never claimed to be a world changer, but what she did and how she did it was quietly reshaping the world around her. At global forums, she spoke not of revenge, but of discernment. At universities, she didn't shout about chasing success, but taught students how to walk away instead of staying to prove their worth to those who never deserved it. And on headlines across articles and news feeds, people began to call her new names: the keeper of dignity's flame, the woman who would not yield. One late evening after a long day, Olivia sat by the window, watching the city lights below. She thought back to that night standing alone in the grand ballroom as every condescending stare fell upon her, and no one stood up in her defense. She smiled not out of joy, but out of clarity. When you protect your dignity in a room full of arrogance and lies, you have already won, even if no one claps for you. After her speech that moved the entire Global Leadership Summit, Olivia Bennett returned to her office in silence. No media crew waited outside. No lavish celebration followed, and she didn't need any of it. For her, the greatest reward was knowing that her story had been heard by millions, and more importantly, that it had touched them. From bustling cities to remote villages, from young women of color in America to aspiring entrepreneurs in Africa, thousands of letters, emails, and messages poured in. People shared with Olivia things they had never dared to tell anyone. Being rejected from interviews because their names didn't sound Western. Being overlooked in meetings despite being the biggest contributor. Being told to smile more to be approachable. Being dismissed simply for being themselves. And in each of those stories, they wrote, "Your story helped me stand tall. I no longer see myself as a victim. For the first time, I feel my worth doesn't need anyone's permission." A month after the summit, Olivia was invited to speak at a high school in a low-income neighborhood. She entered the small auditorium. No cameras, no stage lights, just the clear, focused eyes of students watching her closely. She spoke softly without grand vocabulary. She simply shared that she too once sat in a classroom, that she too once felt alone, that she too had been afraid of appearing too different in front of people who didn't understand her. A student stood up, hands trembling. "Miss Olivia, what should I do if one day I try my hardest, but they still reject me?" Olivia paused. Then she walked down and stood beside him. Looking directly into his eyes, she said, "You don't need their acceptance to know you're worthy. Your job is to remember that even when every door shuts in your face." The small auditorium broke into applause, not out of admiration, but out of shared understanding. Meanwhile, Michael Hartley, the man who once belittled Olivia, was now living a very different life. No more private jet business trips. No more elite political galas. No more admiring glances. He had moved out of the family estate, now living in a smaller, quieter apartment. Journalists no longer sought him out. His name had become synonymous with disgrace and downfall. Michael began working for a charitable organization, not as a director, but as a volunteer. He distributed rice-sorted documents, worked backstage things he had never imagined doing before. At first, he did it to calm the public, but the more he worked, the more he realized for the first time in his life, he was truly listening to people without responding with orders. One afternoon, Michael received a letter. No sender name, just one line inside. "Self-respect cannot be learned in business school. It only comes when you place your heart at the level of others." He knew who had written it, and for the first time, Michael Hartley didn't get angry. He folded the letter and placed it in his wallet right next to the photo of his mother, who had once taught him to be kind, but whom he had long ignored. Back at Olivia's office, things continued as usual. She was still the CEO, still managing deals, making decisions, attending meetings like any other leader. But now every decision she made was anchored in one guiding principle. We don't do business with those who don't respect people. Some said her standards were too rigid, but Olivia stood firm. And strangely enough, the more she held her ground, the more her company thrived. Partners grew, revenue rose, employee loyalty deepened, and most importantly, they no longer worked just for a paycheck, but for the feeling of building something right. By the end of that year, an international organization, honored Olivia Bennett as one of 100 people redefining the world through ethics. Upon receiving the award, Olivia simply said, "I didn't come here to change the world. I just refused to let it change me." On a Friday afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed diagonally through the tall glass windows, Olivia Bennett sat in a private conference room facing 3 representatives from a massive international investment group. They had just proposed a nearly $2 billion partnership, double the amount she once walked away from with the Hartley family. One of the representatives spoke, his voice calculated and smooth. "We're very impressed with your company's current position, Ms. Bennett. And if you agree, your brand will go global. However, we'd like to revisit Clause 12 in your internal ethics policy, the one you published publicly." Olivia's brow furrowed slightly. Clause 12. The non-negotiable rule that her company would never collaborate with any partner involved in labor exploitation or discriminatory behavior. The representative gave a faint smile. "You know, the real world is more complicated than ideals. Sometimes we need to be a little flexible with certain principles as long as the outcome benefits both sides." A heavy silence blanketed the room. Sarah Mitchell, seated beside Olivia, held her breath. Her eyes turned to Olivia as if waiting for a line to be crossed, but Olivia didn't look at her. Nor did she look at the investors. She only looked down at her own hands, the same hands that once trembled the night she was humiliated at the Hartley Gala. Then she lifted her head and spoke firmly. "I once walked away from a $900 million deal because of a single insult. I'm not going to break my principles for a larger number." The room fell silent. The investors were stunned. Then one of them, the eldest, smiled and slowly nodded. "I just wanted to see if you're really the woman the world is praising. And now I believe you are." Sarah looked stunned. Olivia gave a small smile, not of pride, just a quiet nod of affirmation to herself. At the same time, in a small university in the South, a sophomore student wrote an essay titled, "I Don't Need Permission to Exist." In her piece, she recounted a time her professor removed her from a presentation group because, "Your accent doesn't sound professional." She wrote, "I almost stayed quiet, but then I thought of Olivia Bennett, and I spoke up." That essay was widely shared, becoming a fresh source of inspiration. The student didn't yet know that just weeks later, Olivia herself would invite her for a summer internship at her company. One quiet evening, Olivia sat alone at her mahogany desk, the warm light shining onto a notebook she'd used since the early days of her career. On the first page, she rewrote a single sentence. "Never let anyone define your worth. Never let success come from submission." She looked up toward the city where streetlights glowed like tiny stars scattered through the skyline. Each light was a person, silently fighting to stay true to themselves. She knew she couldn't change the whole world, but if she could be a mirror for others so they could see that they too are worthy, then that was a mission worth living for. Elsewhere, Michael Hartley sat in the audience at a public panel on business and social responsibility. He was no longer the one on stage. No hosts introduced him with grand titles. Now he was just a listener and a learner. When the speaker mentioned Olivia Bennett as a role model for ethical leadership, Michael bowed his head, not out of shame, but because for the first time he truly admitted to himself, "She taught me something that a lifetime of wealth could never buy. Dignity cannot be borrowed." That autumn, as golden leaves began to scatter across the broad city streets, a quiet but symbolic event took place at a public library in New York, the opening of the exhibition Dignity Unbowed, inspired by the journey of Olivia Bennett. There were no flashing cameras, no red carpet, only raw, honest visuals, a photo of Olivia walking out of the Hartley Gala with pride in her eyes. Video footage of the press conference where she announced her withdrawal from the $900 million deal. Handwritten letters from students across the world. And at the center of the room, displayed with reverence, sat a replica of Olivia's personal notebook, its first page bearing a bold handwritten line. Dignity has no unit of measurement, but it's always the most expensive thing you'll ever own. Visitors didn't talk loudly. They didn't take selfies. They stood in silence, reading, reflecting, and many left with reddened eyes. At that very moment, Olivia was in a very different place, a small meeting room in Kenya where she and her team were negotiating a sponsorship program to bring tech education to young women in rural Africa. No cameras, no social media posts, no live streams. But to Olivia, this was success. She wasn't chasing the spotlight. She wanted to give others the very opportunities she once dreamed of, and had to fight to create for herself. After the meeting, a young woman on the project team whispered to Olivia, "I used to think that for a woman of color to succeed, she had to become someone else. But now I know I can be myself." Olivia gently squeezed her hand and smiled. Don't change to fit the world. Be strong enough that the world has to adjust to fit you. A few weeks later, at a United Nations special forum, Olivia was invited to speak. She declined the usual keynote format. Instead, she told a simple story about a street vendor from her hometown, a woman who once told young Olivia, "You can be poor in money, but never be poor in dignity." The room fell silent. Well-dressed diplomats from around the world sat in stillness, listening to a modest story. Yet everyone understood this was the message the world had been missing. Meanwhile, in a closed-door interview, Michael Hartley reappeared after nearly a year in the shadows. He didn't wear a designer suit. There were no bodyguards. His face was quieter, his gaze familiar but no longer arrogant. When asked, "If you could go back to that night, would you do anything differently?" Michael didn't hesitate. He answered, "I would stay silent, and if I could, I would invite her to sit down and speak, not because she was a business partner, but because she deserved to be heard." The interviewer pressed, "Do you think you've lost everything?" Michael nodded. "Yes, I've lost a lot, but I'm also learning how to live again. Not as a Hartley, but as a man who knows how to apologize. And listen, when asked by a journalist, "Do you think you've won, Olivia?" she shook her head. "I never saw this as a battle. I didn't want anyone to lose. I just wanted to hold on to the one thing that mattered, self-respect. And if that inspired someone else to do the same, then I know I was on the right path." Late winter at a global youth entrepreneurship conference in Seoul. Olivia Bennett made an appearance not with the grand protocol everyone expected. No entourage, no security, no interpreter. She quietly took a seat in the third row, just like everyone else. It wasn't until the event coordinator introduced her with a brief statement. A woman who redefined success with just 2 words, dignity, that the entire room rose to its feet in applause. Olivia stepped onto the stage and took the microphone without using the podium. She didn't present a startup. She didn't talk about investment capital. She didn't cite revenue numbers. Instead, she asked the audience, "How many of you have ever been asked to change who you are just to be accepted?" Nearly half the hands in the room went up. Olivia offered a bittersweet smile and nodded. "So have I. And for a time I believed I had to be less different, less distinct to fit the mold the world had created. But that night, the night I was called the help in a room full of power, I realized I don't have to fit any mold. I can be the new mold. The room fell silent. A student stood up, eyes filled with tears. Do you think what you've done is just too hard for ordinary people like us? Olivia paused, then stepped off the stage and walked toward the student. Taking the young person's hand, she said, "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just refused to bow to what was wrong, and you can too. Anyone can. So long as you remember, self-respect never needs permission." At a separate event in Los Angeles, one of the major investors who had once turned his back on Olivia, saying she was too principled, now hosted a gala themed "Ethics as the Foundation of Sustainable Growth." No one expected Olivia Bennett to be honored at the very event hosted by someone who once opposed her. When asked about the decision, the investor simply said, "I lost a deal with her, but she helped me regain something I almost lost, my own self-respect." In one of her rare appearances on live television, the host asked, "Are you afraid that in the end your unyielding stance will leave you isolated?" Olivia laughed softly. "I'm not afraid of isolation. I'm afraid of becoming like the people who once hurt me. The world doesn't need more CEOs who can squeeze profit at any cost. The world needs people who know when to say no." Back at her office, Olivia placed a new photo on her desk. It showed her younger self, taken from behind, walking out of the Hartley estate. Her head was high. Her hands were empty, but her heart was unwavering. She stared at the photo for a long moment. Sometimes to move forward, you don't need to look ahead. You only need to remember how firmly you once stood when the storm was at your back. Elsewhere in the world, Michael Hartley now lived in a small seaside town. He worked as a program manager for a nonprofit training unemployed youth with job skills. No more prestige, but full of honesty. One afternoon, he received a letter, an invitation to attend a forum titled "Restoring Trust in Business." The sender was Sarah Mitchell, vice president of Olivia's company. There was no personal message, only one line at the end. Everyone deserves a second chance if they're humble enough to relearn the first lesson. Michael sat with the letter in his hands for a while, then nodded. He knew this time, if he was invited to the table, he wouldn't be the first to speak. He would listen, especially when the voices speaking were the ones he once dismissed. 1 year after the day Olivia Bennett walked out of the Hartley Estate ballroom, the business world had changed. Not because someone rewrote the rules, but because one woman refused to play by the old ones. In March the following year, at the World Business Forum in Geneva, thousands of leaders, scholars, and innovators gathered to discuss a single question. What does success mean in a world full of loss? No orchestra, no fireworks, no champagne. Just one empty chair at the center of the stage, Olivia Bennett's. When it was her turn, Olivia didn't stride up as expected. She walked slowly holding an old notebook, the same one she used in her early days as a founder. She spoke voice calm, as if talking to herself. "I don't have the answer for everyone. I only know this: if I must choose between being praised and losing my self-respect, or being criticized and keeping my heart, I'll always choose the latter. I didn't come here to change the system. I came to protect the human part of us from being devoured by the system." The hall didn't erupt in applause. No one dared break the silence. Because truth doesn't need ovation, it only needs to be acknowledged. In the back row, Michael Hartley was present. He wore no suit. He represented no company. He sat quietly for the first time, without his ego. As the event concluded, he approached Olivia, not to ask for forgiveness, only to say, "Thank you for not silencing me with rage, but with your calm." Olivia looked at him. No anger, no bitterness, just a gentle nod. "No one is born perfect, Michael, but every day we get to choose to become better." They didn't shake hands. they didn't embrace. But for the first time, two people once on opposing sides saw each other as equals. That December, at the Icons of the Decade Awards ceremony, the committee announced Olivia Bennett's name. She wasn't there. When asked by reporters, her assistant simply handed over a note from Olivia. "I choose to give the stage to those still fighting for their dignity, where there are no cameras, no applause, no awards. They are the ones truly inspiring the world." And at that exact moment, in a small town in India, a 17-year-old girl had just refused to sign an exploitative labor contract, the one they said was her only chance to escape poverty. She had nothing except for a video she once watched. A woman of color walking out of a room full of powerhead, held high eyes unyielding. There was no need to translate the message into Hindi. She understood. Olivia Bennett's story didn't end with blazing glory. It ended with something far more profound, a timely word, a quiet act, one person who dared to refuse. And from there, thousands of others began to dare as well. And you, what will you choose when faced with rejection? What will you protect when silence seems easier? Tell your story, because maybe it will become the light that guides someone else. This isn't the story of a woman who defeated the world. It's the story of a woman wounded by the world who never lost herself. She didn't fight with shouting. She didn't retaliate with power. She simply walked out head held high with her dignity intact. And that moment changed everything. This story isn't about perfection. It's about a choice. The choice not to bow. The choice to remain whole, even if it means losing everything else. She didn't need the title of hero. She didn't need statues built in her honor. Because what she did became a quiet mirror in the minds of millions. In a world where humility is mistaken for weakness, where silence in the face of injustice is seen as wisdom, she chose the life no one dared to choose. She chose to stand alone. And from one person who stood, thousands learned how to stand tall. So, if you've ever been dismissed, if you've ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up, if you've ever cried alone because no one stood beside you, remember this. You are not alone. You have the right to choose, and you deserve respect without asking for permission. Olivia Bennett's story has ended, but those like her like you can begin a new one right now. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it.